بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. So alhamdulillah, today we started what Sheikh Amin termed the conclusion of this surah, of the Sūrah al-Ḥashr. It's important because when we read the Quran or we recite the Quran, we don't see paragraphs. We don't see, here's the introduction, here's the body, here's the conclusion. You don't even see really the beginning of a sentence or the end of a sentence. It's not marked that way. There's no punctuation marks. So it requires a level of mastery and understanding, right, that allows a person to identify where is the introduction, where is the conclusion. So even sometimes in class, we'll ask students that, okay, how many sentences? So I do this often when I teach, Tafsīr classes and so on with students that are doing it in Arabic. I'll ask them to analyze the grammar of the verse. And sometimes I'll start by asking them, how many sentences are in this ayah? And sometimes they get this confused look because there's this misconception oftentimes that an ayah means a sentence. But that's not true. Sometimes an ayah will have multiple sentences in it. And sometimes an ayah will only have a partial sentence, and then that sentence is continuing in the next ayah. Okay? So we have to remember that the Quran, it's an oral tradition. Right? So in oral tradition, the punctuation is understood by the tone of the speaker's voice. Right? So similarly, right, for example, if you go and you listen to a lecture, we just listen to Sheikh Amin's Tafsīr. Now, Sheikh Amin's Tafsīr itself has an introduction, it has a body, it has a conclusion. Okay? And when we would document this lecture, if someone were to transcribe this lecture, we would see paragraphs. Right? Here's the first paragraph, here's the second paragraph, here's the introduction, here's the conclusion. We don't see it like that in the Quran. So that's where we need the expertise of someone that truly understands and has a mastery over understanding the Quran to now be able to tell, okay, here's now the beginning of the conclusion. Okay? So just that very statement that Sheikh Amin made in the beginning was that we're now starting the conclusion of the surah. That itself is an insight. Okay? So we've been speaking about how this juz, the 28th juz, has a common theme. And we really see that in the first two surahs. If we look at the beginning of Surah Mujadila and then we look at the end of Surah Mujadila, we see that at the end of Surah Mujadila, we see this differentiation or this categorization of two groups, Hizb al-Shaytan and the Hizbullah, right? The group of Shaytan and the group of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then similarly in Surah al-Ḥashr, as we saw today, right, we saw in the conclusion again, Ashabul Nar wa Ashabul Jannah. Okay, so once again we saw this distinction or categorization into two groups. Okay, and if we see the beginning of today's conclusion, right, the surah's conclusion, O you who believe, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu taqullah, fear Allah, وَلْتَنْظُرْ نَفْسٌ مَا قَدَّمَتْ لِغَدٍ, and a soul should think about what it has sent forward for tomorrow. Okay, so there are a few important points that Sheikh Amin made over here. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses to call Qiyamah Ghad, right? That is tomorrow. Okay, meaning that it's coming, it's not far away. Okay. Now, if we take this conclusion and we kind of compare it to the introduction of the surah. The introduction of the surah, as you all remember, was the Hashr of the Yahud, right? And that was referred to as the first gathering. Okay, I find it really interesting that if you look at the mentality of the Yahud, they did not think that they were going to leave their forts. Right? They invested everything that they had inside their forts, right? Because they believed that nothing was going to happen to them, that they were going to stay protected in there. Right? So something that is very important is that whenever we recite the Quran, and the Quran itself helps us do this, is that we shouldn't recite the Quran thinking about, okay, this is just a historical narrative. It's more than a historical narrative. At the beginning of the surah, after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the Yahud being expelled from their residence when they did not expect to be expelled, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَاعْتَبِرُوا يَا أُولِي الْأَبْصَارِ, that, oh, you have intellect, take a lesson and take heed from this. Okay, and then we go to the conclusion. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, this is just a reflection. It's as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that don't make the same mistake that the Yahud made. Okay, that don't think that you're going to be in your dunya forever and that nothing is going to expel you from this dunya. Right? Rather, your time to leave the dunya is quite soon, ghad. Right? So rather than investing everything that you have in this dunya, if you're smart and if you're from ulil absar, if you're the people of foresight, right? If you have that vision to look ahead, right? If you're a visionary, then you should go ahead and invest in the akhirah, right? So وَلْتَنْظُرْ نَفْسٌ مَا قَدَّمَتْ لِغَدٍ. Okay, and then we see وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ إِنَّ اللَّهَ خَبِيرٌ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ. Right? Sheikh Amin, he spoke about the meaning of taqwa, where taqwa actually comes from the Arabic word waqa yaqi, which means to protect. Okay, so we are protecting ourselves, right? Number one, from the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we're protecting ourselves from destruction. Okay, and if we look at Surah al-Mujadila and we remember our discussions over there, there was quite an emphasis on how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is aware, right? Inna Allah khabirun bima ta'malun, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is aware of everything that we do. And this helps us have our taqwa. Okay. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he speaks about don't be those that forgot Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and as a result Allah made them forget themselves. Okay. So over here, Sheikh Amin shared some very key insights, and there was that question that he kind of almost posed as a challenge to all of us, that how many of us can say that I have time for myself? Right? So perhaps when we think time for myself, like, is that my time at the gym? Is that my time with friends? Is that the time that I invest in self-relaxation or whatever hobby that I may have? That's not quite what Sheikh Amin was talking about, and he made that quite clear, right? Time with yourself is when you're able to sit down alone and think about your future, but not the narrow-sighted vision of future, right? But the future of a visionary, and in Muslim visionary, for them the future is the akhirah. Right? That's the connection between the two ayat, right? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is calling the akhirah ghad, tomorrow, right? So that's the future. So how much time do we give to ourselves on a daily basis, even 15 minutes, to think about our future? Right? And I just thought that was a very interesting insight, because we really do spend a lot of time for others. We don't spend it for ourselves. Right? And the result that we don't have time for ourselves is because we've forgotten Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Meaning the time that a person spends alone in the dhikr of Allah, that's the time that's actually counting for that person's future. Right? That's what you're sending forward for yourself. Okay? So I think if I may be allowed to just share a reflection, that sometimes we make justifications for ourselves for why we don't have time to spend with ourselves, right? And often that justification comes in the form of, well, I have responsibilities towards other people, right? I have a responsibility towards my family, I have a responsibility towards my children, I have a responsibility towards, the greater community, so on and so forth. But I think if we're honest with ourselves and we take a moment to look ourselves in the mirror, I think we would find that most of those justifications, they're not real. Right? The fact is we don't like to be with ourselves because we're just not used to it. Okay? The moment that even when we do find time to be alone and we try to do dhikr, we find that our mind is always, it's diverted somewhere else. Right? We're always invested somewhere else. Okay? So we kind of feel this overwhelming sense of despair almost and guilt when we're alone because we don't like being alone. But I don't think that should stop us from taking out that time. That's something that we have to overcome, right? And it could be as simple as, if I take a really simple example, that a person has familial commitments or commitments towards their family and children. I think at a basic family level, right, a person could simply just have an honest conversation with their spouse that, hey, look, I would like to have some time for myself, for my dhikr. And I would like you to have some time alone for your dhikr as well. Okay? So let's sit down and let's see, okay, how can we schedule and pencil this in? Right? It's not a very, I don't think it's an unreasonable conversation. I think it's a very reasonable conversation. But again, I think the reason that sometimes we don't have that conversation is deep down, we actually don't want to, right? That we don't want to have this time alone. So that was one insight that Sheikh Amin, he brought out from this, is that we need to take out time for ourselves, okay? And then the other key insight that Sheikh Amin, he took out from this, connected to the next ayah as well, is that when we think about sincerity, right, and we think about what is our goal, right, whether that be a personal spiritual goal or that be a goal of rectifying the community at a um, you know at a more at a communal level, in all of those aspects, we must remember that our goal is Jannah, right? Sheikh Amin was kind of really going in on a group of people. I wouldn't say it really a group. I would say it's a mentality. It's an attitude where people say, I'm only doing this for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I don't want Jannah. And Sheikh Amin kind of really just exposes the elementary level of thinking that is. And he calls it out for what it really is. Because when we say, okay, I'm doing it for someone else, or I just want to be nice to other people, or I just want Allah's pleasure, right? Well, where are you going to see Allah's pleasure? Right? Where are you going to experience His pleasure? Where are you going to experience His rahmah? You're going to experience His rahmah in Jannah, right? So he made an allusion to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, imanan wa ihtisaban, that a person, any action that we do has to be with iman, and that's your ikhlas, that you're doing it for Allah, but at the same time you also expect Allah's reward in Jannah. Right? That's why the next ayah talks about la yastawi ashabun nari wa ashabul jannah, that the people of the fire and the people of Jannah are not the same. Okay? And then this is something that we've heard Sheikh Amin mention over and over, ashabul jannati humul faizun, that the people of Jannah, they are the successful ones. Right? So this is how we define our success. So now if we take it at a spiritual level, that a person, let's say, takes out time for themselves and they're sitting there trying to connect to Allah, they're making dhikr, but you're not getting that feeling of ecstasy. Yeah, you're not getting that feeling of bliss where you're floating in the clouds. Right? Sometimes you might not. Right? But that's not how we define a successful session of dhikr. Right? A successful session of dhikr doesn't mean that, okay, if I experienced that bliss, I was successful. And if I didn't experience that feeling of bliss, then I wasn't successful. No. Just the fact that we made dhikr of Allah, we put in our effort, and we expect that reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A person takes out 15 minutes, whether you feel anything or not, but if for every minute and every second, you're expecting that I'm going to see the reward of every subhanallah that I say in Jannah. That's a successful session, right? That's what makes it successful. Okay. Similarly, if we take it now to a communal level, even a global and international level, a person is, Sheikh Amin gave the example of, our efforts to aid and assist our brothers and sisters in Gaza. Okay. After so many months, a person might feel frustration. Well, nothing's happening. Right? So does that mean we're unsuccessful? No. Right? That's the beauty of Islam that Sheikh Amin was saying, that when we view success in light of the akhirah. Right? That we're not doing it as harsh as it may sound and as insensitive as it may sound, we're not doing it merely because we want to help the people in Gaza. If they get helped, then that's wonderful, and we love that and we want that. But at the end of the day, our goal is I'm doing it for myself. It's my akhirah. Right? It comes down to my akhirah. Okay. So that's how Islam removes the burden of psychological stress from a person. Okay. And that's something that, as Sheikh Amin was really stressing today, is that Muslims, by and large, are very frustrated, right? And we come off as people that are very angry, right? Whereas Islam is actually, if we believe in the qadr of Allah and we believe that He is Al-Hakim, right? You remember that the surah started with Al-Aziz Al-Hakim. He's the one who has all the wisdom. And the surah will also end with Al-Aziz Al-Hakim. He has all the wisdom. Okay. So as long as we trust that Allah has hikmah, and then we continue doing what we have to do, then we're successful. Right? And that is the definition of success that is given to us over here. When we take the burden of success upon ourselves in seeing results, then we're not being Islamic, we're actually being anti-Islamic, and we're taking upon a burden that we don't need to take upon. Right? So Allah is Al-Mukallif. He is the one who puts the taklif. He is the one who puts the burden upon us. We don't need to put any more burden upon ourselves. That's not our job. Right? So there are some very key insights in regards to a person's own individual spiritual journey, and also the spiritual journey and the spiritual journey of the community as a whole. I'll go ahead and stop here, inshallah, and we can open the floor for questions, discussions, reflections, inshallah. Yes.
I was listening to the lecture back home. So Sheikh Amin said that we only do things for the pleasure of Allah. We should not, if we expect some benefit of what we do in this world, then we won't get pleasure. We won't get the reward of it in the akhirah. Well, two things I actually have two or three different, I think they're all kind of connected. One is, in an earlier session we had said that having a reward in the akhirah does not mean that you will not see results of your work in this dunya. So if one has the mindset of, hey, I want the reward of the akhirah, but gosh, it's nice to see it in this dunya too. It's motivating, you get to see results, and it's actually for dawah, other people see it too. And sunnatullah is that if you do A, B, C, then D will likely happen if it's permission. How do we reconcile that? The second part, I think, is, at one time, in one of the earlier lectures, we had talked about, even looking for Jannah and Jahannam as a reward or punishment is the level to strive for. But ihsan is to do it for seeing Allah's face, right? Which naturally implies that Jannah is not the goal. It's something beyond Jannah that can only happen while you're in Jannah, but even higher than that. So when people are saying we do it for the pleasure of Allah, which my understanding of that was that to see what's Allah. Anyways, that's how can you help reconcile those?
Right. So let's start with the first one. Right. The first one, I think I'll try to rephrase it, and you let me know that if I'm right. So it's like, how do you reconcile between Sheikh Amin telling us that you shouldn't expect a reward for what you're doing, but at the same time that it's seeing some results of what you're doing is encouraging.
Yeah, no, the nuance where he said that if you get the reward in this world, you will not get it in the next.
Hmm.
Or if you are expecting in this world, then you may get it, but you won't get it in the next. At least that's what I understood.
Right. Okay, so I think the reconciliation of that is that the reconciliation of that is that perhaps what Sheikh was referring to is if that's the only goal that the person has, right? Meaning the person is not doing it. It's not like their mentality is not that, okay, if I see the fruit of what I'm doing in this world, then that's good, right? But rather their mentality is that is why I'm doing it, and that's the only reason why I'm doing it, right? So they're kind of like, yeah, right. So like that's the primary motivation, right? Whereas the primary motivation should be the akhirah, not the results in this dunya. Okay? And that's in line with the ayah as well. وَأُخْرَى تُحِبُّونَهَا نَصْرٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَفَتْحٌ قَرِيبٌ. So as the primary, as the primary reason is that you have, you'll get Jannah, you'll get Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's maghfirah, so on and so forth. Okay. And then, ukhra, another thing that you will get is the help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and a close victory. Okay. And then there's a question online, and that's kind of the same question as Brother Farouk asked, that we do find, scholars, so on and so forth. Okay, for example, Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah, he does mention it very clearly that there are levels of ihsan, or there's levels of ikhlas. Right? One is that a person does it out of fear of punishment. That's the lower level. Then a person does it at the level of because they want reward, and then the highest level is you do it out of haya, or out of just for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How do you reconcile that with what we heard today about, you should expect, the reward in Jannah? Okay. It's actually a very nuanced question. And Sheikh Amin, he alluded to it, right? The simple answer is, why should we expect Jannah and why should we hope for Jannah? That is part of our submission to Allah. That is part of us not thinking of ourselves as above receiving reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So I'll give it to you as an example, right? A very simple example. And sometimes day-to-day examples make things easier to understand. Okay. I remember one time when we were in madrasa, right? Our teacher, rahimahullah, Mufti Anauddin, it was like some question or something. One of the students, they answered it correctly, right? And the ustad, Sheikh became very happy. He was very pleased by the answer. He told the student, "Come, I'm going to give you some money." And so he pulled out some money, and he's like, "Here." The student's reaction was like, Ustaz Ji, I didn't do it for that. Like, please just keep it. Like, like I feel shy. And he actually got upset, right? And then he taught us a very important lesson. And I was able to apply that for, the rest of my life and how we should think about Jannah. He said, look, like he explained it very nicely. He said, like, it's not about the amount that I'm giving you, right? But it's about the fact that I'm expressing my pleasure, right? So it's not about the dollar bill, right? It was rands in South Africa, right? It's not about the rand, right? It's about the fact that I'm giving it to you, right? It's about the fact that I'm expressing my pleasure to you, okay? So when we say that, okay, there are awliya that say that, okay, or there are, great scholars that said that, your intention or your goal shouldn't be the Jannah, right? It shouldn't be Jannah in of itself, right? But it should be in the fact that, okay, this is what Allah has promised me, and this is going to be Allah's expression of His love and appreciation for what we've done, and this is what Allah wants me to ask for, right? So in saying that I don't want Jannah, there's a level, we may not see it, but it's as if we're saying that, oh, I'm above what Allah is offering me. But we're never above, right? We're always in need, and we always want what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encourages us to seek. Right? That's what the Prophet ﷺ said, no, you should ask for Jannah. Okay? So even being saved from Jahannam is because that's where Allah is going to manifest His anger. Okay, and we're not above. We're not so great that we have to think that, oh, like I'm not worried about being punished. We should be worried about being punished, right? So there should be that inner level of humility that leads us to say that, no, I need to ask protection from Jahannam, and we should recognize that anything Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us, that's from His fadl, and that's from His karama and His generosity. We are in need of His generosity. We should be very excited to receive that generosity from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah. So I hope that clarifies that question, inshallah. We'll go ahead and end here, inshallah. Subhanallah bihamdihi, subhanakallah bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.